Well, thank you for joining us. 10 to 2 experts in flexible working and part-time recruitment. My name is Jo Gregory. I'm a director here, as is my lovely colleague Tracy, who we're joined by this lunchtime. Thank you for giving us your time. I do hope that you find today useful. We are going to talk today about some very practical and applicable areas of best practice for employing people flexibly. We at 10 to 2 practice what we preach. We all work flexibly in one way or another, and we feel that it's a really important area for us to be able to share with our clients. We've got many stories of things that have gone right and things that have gone wrong, and we want to support you guys as much as possible in getting the very best out of your flexible workforce and making it work for you and your business. So as I said, we are joined by my fellow director, Tracy, who's going to be taking you through the content of today. We've got a lot of information to get through, and we do not want to take up your entire lunch break. So we will be moving through at pace. Feel free to take notes. However, we will be sending out the presentation in the coming days, along with the associated report, for you to be able to go through at your leisure. I think that's all I need to go through, housekeeping wise. Yeah. So without further ado, I will hand over to Tracy.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Yep, as Jo said, it's a nice opportunity to just step back. We're all busy. We're always full on with emails, back-to-back meetings. So I think we like these lunchtime sessions. It's half an hour, grab a sandwich or a salad or whatever, step back and just think about a particular topic. And hopefully what we're going to share with you, there's some real life examples here from our own clients as well. So without further ado, let's get on to the agenda, and I'll just run through what we're going to talk about. So first of all, just a couple of recruitment and retention challenges that some of you may be experiencing right now or have experienced. And then we'll run through, oops, apologies, that was me pressing on. Oh, well, I've gone on to the next slide. I'll talk about that in a minute. So the three main areas I'm going to cover are recruiting and onboarding flexible workers, managing them when they're working flexibly, and then also managing teams that are working flexibly. You'll see some of the slides are a bit content heavy. I'm not going to read absolutely everything on the slide, but this will be sent out to you afterwards, and it's just good to have for future reference. So just going on to that slide, you did get a peek of. So the reason I'm showing this is because, you know, we're not just talking about our expertise today. This webinar uses research we did amongst our own client base, and we will send this research. That's one of the things Jo mentioned we'll send out afterwards. And it includes feedback and insights from some of our clients, particularly those who have embraced flexible working over a number of years. Some of their names are on here and their logos, and the content here is sort of real life tried and tested experience. So going on to the first area, just wanted to cover some of the recruitment and retention challenges in the market at the moment. Kick off on the right hand side of the slide. There are a couple of interesting quotes here from Sodexo, particularly if you're a small or medium sized business, just around flexibility. So firstly, 3/4 of people are saying that they're more likely to apply for a role if there's flexible hours or there's some sort of flexible pattern. I appreciate that was a 2022 quote. That's only been increasing over the years. So, you know, that is a really key number. And we know at the moment, talking to our HR contacts and hiring managers, that there is an issue with the number of candidates applying for roles in certain sectors. So the more attractive you can make the role, the more attractive you can make your business, then you're going to attract more candidates. The second interesting quote there is 52% of employees would rather work for a big corporation. Now, this is interesting. So nearly half said they were put off working for a smaller business because of lack of flexibility. So there is a perception, and that's a really important word. There's a perception that smaller businesses are less flexible. But actually, in our experience, it's the other way around. Smaller businesses have the opportunity to be very flexible. So this is a perception, apologies again, this is a perception in the market that SMEs having to deal with. On the left-hand side, this is all about retention. You know, are you engaging your employees? Are you creating the right environment for them? Are you recognizing that the thing that people do most in their life is work? Alongside sleep, they work. So, you know, it's such an important area to engage your employees. And that's, you know, UK employee engagement remains stagnant at 9%. You know, that is so low. And the other number, over 40% of working people feel stressed most of the day. You know, that's quite a sort of a horrifying number. And interestingly, not on the slide here, but Oxford Economics said that the cost of recruiting a professional generally can be between £20,000 and £30,000. You know, that's not just the salary, that's the cost of time, productivity, all the people involved in that process, loss of productivity, training cost, agencies, equipment. I mean, time to get up to speed. So if somebody leaves and you have to re-recruit, re-onboard, it's a huge cost to the business. So having engaged employees who are productive and are going to stay loyal is absolutely key. And flexibility does contribute to that engagement and that retention. Just moving on.
If you don't mind, Tracy, because I can see a number of the people who we've got on the call today work with businesses, and I know I've had these conversations with you around the importance of ongoing engagement and looking at flexibility to improve that ongoing engagement. So if any of you have got questions or queries, I should have said at the beginning, apologies, we do have a Q&A box, so please feel free to pop in any comments, any questions. They are completely confidential, only Tracy and I can see them rather than the entire group. But please do feel free to be as interactive as you like through that Q&A box, and we will try and address any queries either live or as a follow-up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jo. So looking at this quote, so Fiona is from RDT quoted, was one of the respondents in our survey. So I've taken this from the survey just to give you an example. This is a really great quote. And she said, you know, she really highlighted that whereas before the pandemic, flexibility was often a women's issue, you know, that environment has very much changed. So when you're thinking about flexibility in your business, it applies to all of your people. It isn't just because of childcare anymore. You know, there's an increasing amount of people caring for elderly parents. There's an increasing amount of people wanting to do other things in their lives that give them a good, flexible work-life balance. It could be charitable activities, a little side hustle. So the demand for flexibility is constantly rising. So let's have a look at the first sort of area, incorporating flexibility into a role. So it all begins at this stage. So one of the things we often talk to our clients about is when you're either creating a new role or you're re-advertising a role because somebody's left the business, this is an opportunity to look at the job design critically. With a critical eye, you should think about, what does this role need? What are the functional needs? And the functional needs are the primary reason for the role. You know, the job has to be done and it has to be done well. So all the other things surrounding that are secondary in a way. They're not as important. And I'm not saying that flexibility isn't important. I'm saying that it's a thing that you have around that role. As long as that person can do that role, it shouldn't matter what their hours and what the shape of that job is. It's the functions that they do. So you need to get the right person with the right skills, the right experience, the right attitude to get the job done. And by being more open to different working patterns, this increases your chance of finding those skills, people, etc. Because by adding a layer of full-time in-office rigid patterns, you're restricting how many of those right people you're going to. So think about, you know, how do I fit the role into the working patterns of all the other roles in the business? You know, are there any essentials around the days in the office? Are there any core meetings they need to attend? Are there any client-facing requirements that need to be considered? You know, there's no point in somebody having great flexibility but that then puts a huge pressure on the rest of the team for one reason or another. So you do have to have a lot of considerations there. And I think what you often find is, even if the whole team is working flexible patterns, just some tweaks and changes here and there can help the whole team perform well. So 3 things: make sure that flexibility is built into the job description. Make sure you are meeting the functional requirements of that job, though. You know, you've got to get that job done. What are the goals? What are the achievements you're looking for? And make sure that it meets the needs of the business and the team as well. Some great quotes here on the left. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but the third one is really good. In one of our clients, very practical, down-to-earth client, said, focus on skills, experience and values of the role and the individual. The desire to work from home is a secondary detail. And I think that's what we're trying to emphasize here, is that flexibility can pretty much work for most roles. So the next stage would be interviewing and selecting your flexible candidates. So just some considerations you need to have in mind when you're doing this. Probably everybody on the session today, if you've recruited in the last 4 years, you've probably done some of it over video. You know, the first thing we often talk about is, if you are interviewing over video, the process is really important to get right, because it's that first point of contact. And if that first interview doesn't work well, the technology is not set up properly, you're not adjusting how you interview, maybe how you allow the candidate to engage with you on that call in the right way, then you might miss out on that perfect person. So we have got another short guide which we can send out. It's like a top 10 things to think about when you're sort of video interviewing. But essentially, there's a couple of things I wanted to highlight. So first of all, the soft skills. When we look at interviewing, it's often all around the skills-based questions, like the competency questions, that sort of thing. And the soft skills get picked up in person when you're face-to-face. When you're not face-to-face, picking up those soft skills can be more challenging. So this is something you can explore over video, and you wouldn't ordinarily do this face-to-face. So for example, maybe ask a question about how they communicate. How have they found communicating in an environment which is primarily video-based? How have they found their practices changing because of moving to more video hybrid working? And what have they done to make those changes? So sort of try and pick up on the effectiveness of your candidates' communication skills. Because if they're not good at communicating in this remote environment or hybrid environment, you know, they potentially could struggle from day one. The second one is teamwork. And I think in a hybrid environment, when you may not see people for maybe a week or two, how people work as a team and how they consider their colleagues and are empathetic to their colleagues and what's going on around them is really important. If you don't have that day to day in the office, getting little nuances and understanding what's going on. So this sort of whole area of collaboration and recognizing your colleagues is now becoming particularly important. So how do you draw those teamwork skills out of someone? And then thirdly, personal organisation. So particularly if you're recruiting somebody on a part-time basis or somebody who may have a hybrid working pattern, check that they can organise themselves well, you know, that they're not chaotic, that they are able to work with different colleagues on different working patterns. I mean, we have it at 10-2. We are, you know, 90% of us are part-timers. And we all have slightly different working patterns, although there's a core sort of office hours, and it can work. But these are things you would need to explore. You know, and I suppose alongside that, questions could be around, do they have experience of using tools available to do this? So obviously for us, it's Teams and things like that, SharePoint, Teams, they're sort of standard, even standard tools. They don't have to be something fancy or new. So check about the tools they can use. And then the third point, you know, selling the culture and the working environment, that your culture and working environment. This is so important now, and making sure that you're being realistic about your culture and working environment. And don't oversell, because I think this is something we're coming across more and more. As soon as someone steps into the business, I think they'll realise that maybe the delivery, the practicality of what was on paper or offered maybe isn't there sometimes. And it's harder to get across that culture when you're onboarding somebody and it's hybrid and it's part-time and it's more remote. It is harder than it used to be. But we are finding in the market, candidates are more willing to walk away from a job in the early stages now, if they think it's not working for them. So, that will come on to sort of onboarding on the next slide, but it's getting that culture across and making sure that you are geared up for this and you are selling your culture and your benefits and your team as well. It's a two-way street. There's some good quotes here on the left. So, concentrate on communication skills in particular. Number 2 there. Highlight the work-life balance. Talk through what a day would look like. All of those quotes are in the guide, and they are some really good tips from existing people existing clients. So probably I personally feel one of the most critical times for an employee is that initial onboarding process. If anyone has had on the call has had more than 2 or 3 jobs, you may have been in a situation where you haven't been onboarded well. Jo, are you moving the slides around? It's moving.
Sorry.
Stay on onboarding, Jo. That's it.
We've got joint control of it, and it's going a little bit mad. Apologies.
It's like when you've got a learner driver in the in the car.
That's me.
So onboarding, if you've had a number of roles, there's probably been one occasion, maybe if you've been unlucky, where you've gone into an office, you've sat down at your desk on the first day, you've looked around, nobody's introduced you to people. You've got a pile of documents you've been told to read, your laptop's not arrived, you haven't got an email address set up. So your first 2 days are probably A, unproductive, and B, you start thinking, oh, is this right for me? Have I made the right choice? So it's that important in the first few days. It is a really sensitive time for employees as well. They're going to be nervous. They're going to be unsure of themselves. And you want them to buy into your business quickly. You want to them to interact with colleagues quickly. And you want them to become productive really quickly, because that's the cost in the business. So it's really important. But even if you're fully remote, there are ways that you can organise this and make it effective. So things like some in-person meetings, some face-to-face meetings in those early days. It could be with key individuals, with colleagues, with teams. Is there a team meeting or event coming up before they've even joined that you would like to invite them to? To get them to see some faces and see what goes on in one of those events. So how can you draw that person into the team and make them feel like they belong really quickly? Think about the team's requirements as well, not just the onboarding needs of the new person. So what does the team need to do? Are they aware of the plan for onboarding someone? Are they aware someone's joining and what their role is and what they're going to be working and what hours and where? I'm going to say this a few times in the presentation, over communicate. Don't worry about communication. It's better to be transparent and open, and have that technology ready. I know it sounds really straightforward, but it's a big thing. Really, there's nothing to stop us from setting up an email address or having a laptop primed. And could you get it to them 48 hours before they start? So some practical, straightforward things. It might be sort of teaching you to suck eggs, so apologies if it is. So on to, they're onboarded. Let's say they're onboarded and they're fairly comfortable in their role. How do you manage this going on now and going forward? So a couple of minutes on this. We've got some really practical advice here. So some managers can have a really tough job. They've probably got a variety of people to manage. They've got their own day job, delivering what possibly challenging things in changing times, challenging environments. And they might now be managing a team that's disparate. Various hours, a bit of hybrid, not all in the office. So it's an extra layer for managers. They're the fulcrum of making organisations work. So so it's a difficult time for them. We did an interesting exercise a while ago where we asked some people to count up the number of hours in the diary that they were actually sitting, this is face to face, in office time, sitting with their team every day. And one of the responses we got in one company, one of the managers said, oh, I have about 2 weeks when I'm actually, two hours a week when I'm actually in the office with my team. But his requirement in the role was that he wanted them in the office. He wanted that role, that position we were recruiting for, he wanted them in the office. So actually, he wanted to see them in the office. He wanted to know what they're doing, but he himself was only there for 2 hours. So actually that need to be in the office was really null and void because he wasn't seeing what they were doing for the other 34, 35 hours. So I think there's sometimes that, you go back to that original mindset that we all used to have when it was office-based 9 to 5. So managing flexible people often comes back to communication, over communicating, checking in with people in the morning. If they're not going to be in the office for a few days, if it's not going to be in the office for a few days, even if they're going to be in the office once a week, twice a week, checking in when they're at home in the morning, make it 10 minutes, making sure that they're well, they feel connected, that they feel that they understand what's required of them that day, week, month. Feedback to them on calls. It can be informal. This doesn't have to be a performance review. So feedback to them. Feedback on something that they've done, something that the team said. Communications, again, over communicate is vital when someone is remote. And effective performance management. I mean, it's always important anyway, regardless of where you're based, whether it's full-time, office-based or remote and hybrid. But it's even more important when someone's remote, making sure everybody understands what's expected of them from a goals perspective, giving them regular feedback, checking how they're getting on with their achievements and their progress towards goals. And give them feedback from managers and colleagues. So I recognised you did this. I've had feedback from your colleagues that you did that. Great, that's great, well delivered. I've noticed you said you were concerned about something. Do you want to have a chat? How are you giving that sort of regular feedback, and how are you going to check in on a regular basis? So aside from the formal touch, which are usually probably performance reviews, quarterly, half yearly, etc. Just these sort of 10 minutes, informal check-ins, you all right? Because we don't have those water cooler moments, those making a cup of tea in the kitchen moments in the morning, everybody comes in. You don't have those nuanced, relaxed, informal touch points anymore. So as a manager, you've got to find ways of doing that. And the final thing I'd say on this slide, just in terms of managing flexible people, is making sure that the check-ins and the performance mentions that you're talking about do also talk about personal professional development, because this is still really important to people. And not everybody wants to be the next CEO, but everybody does like to develop. Either it's developing new skills, it's improving on skills they've got, it might be the next career move. But that personal professional development still needs to be considered. We did a project a couple of years ago with a really large company, interestingly, which was where we asked ex-employees, hundreds of ex-employees, why they left. And most of the ex-employees said they really loved the business. But the reason they left is that they didn't feel they had a good personal development program or a career path. And it is just a great indicator, and a reminder that people do want to develop in one way or another, and everybody's unique. So it's just understanding and making sure you're listening to them. And another word you'll come across here a lot is listen, listening to them. So I think, and giving them time. Giving people time. It's so easy. I know I think in terms of communications and checking in and making sure somebody knows how to do something. I know I can just assume someone knows how to do something, and if you're sitting in an office together, it's easier to listen and learn whilst you're all there. So don't forget, when people are at home, they aren't there listening how to do something. So finally, moving on to managing flexible teams. Oh, we're on it. We're on it. Once again, so I think the first point we make is over communicate, and I don't think we ever communicate enough. And remember to facilitate those informal interactions. Don't let things become too functional. Use goals and KPIs, etc. So we're firm believers here at 10to2 in using sort of the organisation, the team's numbers as a motivator, as a guide, as a path. You know, we're all on it. We all understand what we've got to achieve, and we like looking forward to that day, and we like sort of talking about how we get there. What can we do? So that's quite it's quite a nice way of bringing people together to communicate. It doesn't have to be numbers, you know, it can be project deliverables. Where are we on track at getting something? And again, we've got a project on that we're all excited about talking about. So it's those sorts of things that can get a team together. And I think as well, sharing numbers like that helps people recognise where their own priorities fit and where they need to spend their time differently or effectively, and that they can structure their week around team goals, company goals, etc. So highlighting team performance, calling out great examples of performance is really valuable. So something we used to do when in office. So I don't know, it might have been Joe might have walked in the office and it might have been, oh, Joe, great job on that last week. You know, that was really good. So what Joe heard was, she did a great job and she feels great. Well done, Joe. Well done. And what everybody else in the office heard was that, obviously, great job, Joe. So not only was it a good job done, the team can see that praise is being given, people are rewarded, it's positive, good things are happening. And when you take that out and that office environment is different, and it becomes too functional, you lose that kind of motivation. So ways of sharing that praise, that positivity, maybe do it at sessions, weekly sessions, when you get together at the start, at the end, find ways of sharing that sort of positivity. And there's a good quote here. So, open communication, clear instruction, empathy and kindness. It's a really lovely summary for this whole area of communication. I'm just checking, Joe, are we on the right slide? Hang on. Yeah, so I just want to pick up on another quote here. Hang on, Joe, we moved on?
I'm being very conscious not to press any buttons.
Sorry. I'm just wondering if I'm just going to talk about, hang on, let me just check. I'm just going to check which slide I'm on to next. Yeah, great, that's okay. So I think what I've been doing there is, I'll talk about that one in a second. So now let's talk about flexible teams, managing flexible teams. So let's go on to that. Bear with me a second. So I've got some nice quotes here as well. Yeah, here we go. Right. So again, I've said it so many times. This is my mantra today: over communicate. And I think I've mentioned about me, I'm not necessarily a good communicator all the time. I might assume, but never assume. You know what they say about assume, don't you? And I think I've sort of covered some of this, actually. I've gone on from the previous one, apologies. So facilitating those informal interactions among the team, don't let it all become too functional. So that team performance, using the goals, apologies, I think I might have been talking through my notes for the other one. Bear with me a second. Yeah, absolutely. So use those goals to motivate the team. And highlighting the team performance. And this is really where I wanted to pick up on some of the lovely quotes that we've got from clients. So Open communication, clear instruction, empathy and kindness. I think that is such a lovely quote from one of our clients and how they work. And it just sort of summarises pretty much everything we've been saying there. And another one of the quotes there was really helpful. So make sure you put in place an effective method for the team to communicate and share information. And that can be as straightforward as using the Microsoft tools you've got, but you might have others. So, do you use SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, chats? I mean, we're a team of 12 at 10to2, and we have a really active Teams chat. And it is like sitting in an office. There are little moments of fun, there are little moments of angst, there's support, there's empathy, there's sharing knowledge. We do everything on that chat. It can get a bit busy sometimes, but you definitely don't feel alone. So some kind of tool to facilitate that is really important. And then going on to the last slide, so don't forget the small print. I'm not going to talk about this because this is a whole topic in its own right in terms of legislation and policy and things like that. But there are legal and statutory things that you need to think about with flexible working. And when you've got a mix of working patterns, having a policy so that everybody understands is absolutely critical. So a flexible working policy is an important base case. The operating process is effectively what we've been talking about this afternoon. So the who, how, when does it work practically? So think about your flexibility. Is it formal or informal? Does something need to be written in an employment contract, or are your employees happy to have some informality? There's probably spectrums here, and I've come across businesses where there's some who are at the very end of the spectrum around flexible working. I would call it output only working, OOW. And that's where they don't really care what you work, when you work, what hours you work, where you work from, as long as you deliver certain objectives. That's probably at the far end of this, the spectrum. Most companies are going to be in the middle somewhere. So yeah, but there is obviously that's the ultimate. So but there is that practicality, and then obviously there is the environment where someone will or may put in a flexible working request, and there is a procedure to follow for that, and you need to be seen to be following that procedure and documenting that procedure. So in the guide we send out, there is a one-pager from an organisation called Machin's, which is a Luton-based legal practice, and that's a good piece all around flexible working requests. So that'll be helpful, I think. And so I'm going to finish off with a quote from Nicola at CPS, who shared a really nice, simple sentence, lead, don't manage. Oh, sorry. Lead, don't manage, share the highs, learn from the lows, listen and praise. And again, there's things in there we've talked about, listening to your staff, because it's harder when you're remote to hear anything. Push a remote. So find ways of listening, and the praise, because again, when you're remote, you can't hear what's going on. You can't hear that praise. So find ways of praising. So I think that summarize it really well. I think when we think about what's going on in the environment today, the political uncertainty, cost of living crisis, all of that sort of stuff, I think it does demand that we manage people, not just the work. And it's always been the case that you have to manage people, but it almost feels in the world we're in now, that's an additional layer that you really need to think about. And be more deliberate about how you do it. So that's me. Apologies for the last couple of slides with the team and the individual.
Tracy, I think that was my fault. We've got dual control over the slides today, which is obviously very problematic.
We'll never do that again. So that's me. I'll put mine and Joe's email address, I think, on the end there, which you'll probably see because we flicked to it anyway. I hope you've been able to take something from this. We've got a brilliant guide to follow up. That's got loads more of this in it. So please do shout if there's any questions.
Well, we've had a couple of questions come through while you've been speaking, Tracy. So thank you so much for that, first of all. I really hope people were able to take away something from today's presentation. There was a lot of information. So if you do want to chat through anything specific, or if there were any areas that you think you might need some greater support on, then as we started by saying, Tracy and I and the rest of the team here deal with flexible working day in, day out, not just from a recruitment perspective, but also consulting with businesses around best practice and, you know, really how to implement flexible working patterns into their organizations. So we would love to be able to help you if we can. Just quickly coming on to the questions, I don't think we're going to have time to answer them all because we don't want to hold you guys up too much. One question's come through around the managing flexible teams. What's your advice on integrating part-time and remote employees when the majority of your employees are office-based and full-time? Now, I've seen this in clients and it is tricky. There's no getting away from that. But Tracy, have you got any words of advice on that difficult situation?
Yeah. I mean, it is important to think of the needs of the team in this process. Absolutely. When somebody's part-time, you need to be very clear on what the deliverables are going to be. Deliverables are going to be, and this should apply to full-time as well, to be honest, though. But you need to make sure that your communications are working well. So, for example, if somebody's working a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and you have your team meeting on a Thursday, and they're not there, well, things are going to start getting disconnected straight away. Communication and work sharing is really important in this case. It'd be similar if somebody was going on holiday. You do handover or signposting to updates or where files are stored, what might come in whilst they were off. There should be someone who they can hand on to or can take ownership of something that might come in on those 2 days. Now, that doesn't mean to say that part-time is not being effective. It's the same as if someone's full-time is going on holiday, and it should be well managed and well organized. So it's that kind of handover piece as well, the organization, which is one of the first points we talked about in interviewing. How do they organize themselves? We also do that. I keep talking about us at Ten2Two, and I do like to think we do walk the talk on this, actually, how we are. A lot of this flexible working and communicating. We are, as I said, 90% of us are remote, and we use Teams really actively. And I see day in, day out, handovers, questions, someone's contacted about this, can someone pick this up? Brilliant communication. So it can definitely work. But, I think if the job is designed well, but if the job is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, inevitably there's going to be things that will pop up on Thursday and Friday. That's just one example of part-time hours. It's not necessarily going to be sort of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but just think through the communications, think through handover, what the customer might expect, your clients, if you're client facing. But it can work effectively.
The other question that we've got, and I think that we might have covered areas of this, but I love the articulation. Thinking about, again, the team management, how would you suggest replacing those water cooler moments? Because they are, I think we forget just how important those moments that we used to take for granted are. So again, Tracy, any thoughts on those water cooler moments that are difficult to replicate when you're all sitting in separate locations?
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting. I can picture my first jobs in the 90s with those little kitchenette environments, talking over the fridge, looking at what's left in the fridge that's gone mouldy, making your cups of tea. Those were brilliant moments. Going up in the lift, talking about quick snippets. It's so important. It really is. So, I mean, one of the clients we work with does a sort of a wind, it's just one example, it does a wind down Friday session. So they get everyone on a call at 4:30. And you can have a theme. It doesn't have to be an agendaed meeting, a formal agendaed meeting. It doesn't have to be sharing goals and KPIs and things like that. But you could say, look, the Friday meeting this week is going to be what food you love and what food you hate. And if anyone can attend, great. If you can't attend because you're busy with a meeting, doesn't matter. But just anyone's free. Let's just have a 30-minute social, 20-minute social chat. Or what's been your highlight? What's been your low light? And that theme's really good because it's a bit of a off your chest kind of moment. You get, hopefully it would elicit support and empathy from members, advice. And we do know someone who does this. And I think what happens is afterwards, people reach out to that individual more privately and go, do you want any help with that? I can, I've experienced that and I can help. So a really nice icebreaker, less formal moment. And all of a sudden people start to share things in those kind of relaxed environments. And I think that's quite a nice bonding kind of process.
It sounds like an awesome idea. I can remember working in offices, as you say, and there being a bit of a wind down on a Friday. We were lucky enough to have a beer trolley that went round our office, which was lovely. If anyone wants to implement a beer lorry that goes round, that would be great. Another thing that springs to mind is that suggestion of leading as well. So if you do have a piece of software like Teams or similar, then be the one to lead those moments remotely. You can replicate that general chat. As Tracy has said, at 10-2, we have a very active Teams communication method. It's not all work related. But if you feel as though the business could do with a few more water cooler moments, then lead by example and have a chat on Teams. You're not going to be distracting people because they can quite easily mute you or come back to you at a later time.
Perfect.
But don't be afraid to implement that and have a chat as you would do if you were in the office.
Absolutely.
Well, we have taken up all of your precious time. We have run slightly over. Thank you again, Tracy, for all of that lovely content, and apologies for the slides jumping around. Thank you so much, everybody who's joined us today. We really do appreciate you giving us your time. We do hope that you've taken something away from this. If you need anything further, our contact details are on the slide in front of you, or you can come through the website. Most of you hopefully will have our contact number. There's always somebody here to take your call, even though we work all over the place. And we would love to hear from you. So until the next webinar, we will bid you adieu. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Bye.